I'm dropping the lead the wrong spot. There we go. Let me turn on the camera. There we are.
Hey.
Howdy.
Hey.
I'm going to look to the wrong. That's right. Wait, hello. It's all mirrored, so everything's screwed up. I'm looking to the left instead of the right. I can't figure it out. Hi, Becca. We're going to get started in just a minute, of course. For anyone who just came on board, welcome. This is episode 6 of the TechChat Tuesdays for Chariot Solutions. These also go up in our podcast stream as well at chariotsolutions.com/techchat, techcast. And we'll get started in just a minute or two here.
Number 6. Wow.
Number 6 already. I know. A work in progress. And everything is muted. Everything is turned off.
Yep, phone's off.
Yep.
No, it's not. Okay.
All right, we'll get started. Welcome to Chariot's TechCast Tuesdays, Tech Chat Tuesdays. I'll never get it right. Tuesday, July 28th, 2020. I had to use my date widget to figure out what date it is. Woof. I'm Ken Rimple.
I'm Becca Record.
Yep. Hi, Becca. And we're here to talk about, dev stories, some things we're listening to, some things we're looking at, and let's get started. So I hate to start on a down note, but I am a huge fan back from the last decade in Mythbusters, and I didn't know this until just a couple days ago that Grant Imahara, the one of the 3 amigos in the second crew in Mythbusters, died of a brain aneurysm suddenly on this month.
You just never really know.
You never know. I know, you never know. But I want to bring it up because there's a really good article in Variety, and it's basically by Tori Bellisi and Carrie Byron, who were the other 2 members of that second team. There were the main Mythbusters, and then there was a second unit, and the second unit did other experiments. They would switch between the 2 units to add variety to the show, and they were like the mainstay of my checking stuff out, watching TV, spending a lot of time in the aughts. Just a great group of people. Tori Bellisi had a really nice note about how he, met Grant. Grant was an ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, in the model shop, working on Star Wars and things like that. And Tori came in there, and that's where they met. And that they had a really good time working together. And then all of a sudden, they got this great gig for more than 2 decades on Mythbusters, and just had a great run. And Carrie Byron has a more visceral take and a more emotional take. And it's really, it's very, very sweet, and it's very heartfelt. And you could just feel the absolute respect and love these guys had for each other. It was just wonderful. So if you were a fan of Mythbusters and you didn't know about this, you should read this article in Variety. And so that's my lead off today. Now, I'm going to actually throw you into the ring here, Becca. You had a talk on from Tracey Welson-Rossman, right, about digital transformation in the beauty industry?
Yeah, so Tracey contributes to Forbes every once in a while, and this one was really good. So we hear a lot about how coronavirus is kind of like speeding up digital transformation in education and healthcare. But what she's trying to say here is like the beauty industry is really feeling that push too, and they're kind of pivoting. So I know our audience here is definitely not beauty, definitely not fashion, but the tech piece of this is fascinating. So one of the examples she points out is Estee Lauder and their lipstick shades. So they're piloting this program called VTO, which is virtual try-on. And what you do is you kind of go into like a studio, like a virtual studio, and it shows you different lipstick colors like on your face. And apparently with like a decent amount of reliability too. So I actually did this the other day to try on some sunglasses on Ray-Ban's site. And remember like you go to the boardwalk and there's those like little booths where you can try on different hairstyles, and they look horrendous. It looks like someone who's like just like figuring out Photoshop is putting like a blonde wig on you.
Right.
So that was like kind of the expectation that I had for tools like this. Like it's just
Right.
going to look terribly, horrendously Photoshopped onto you. But they do a really good job of like getting a sense of depth and dimension And so you can literally move your face left to right, move around, it stays put. The sunglasses were about the size that they would be on your face. So I'm really interested in seeing these tools as someone who is honestly really opposed to buying things online. I'm very much like an in-person shopper. I like to feel a product, like have like a tangible experience.
Yeah.
So this is kind of changing the game a little bit. Like I find I really enjoy that, and it's meeting with a certain level of success. And so what Tracey's saying here is just like this is the way that a lot of beauty companies are pivoting, but are also gonna have to pivot shortly here. Especially when you think of like stores like Sephora, whose whole models are built on going in and physically trying on testers and everything. Like that can't happen in this world right now. So
we don't know how long it's going to last, you know? Yeah.
What's that?
You know, so that we don't know how long this is going to last. I mean, vaccines can take 10 years to develop, and not to sound depressing, but you know, it's very rare to do a full vaccine in a year. So probably unheard of. So I think it's going to be the case for a long time that we're going to have to come up with these things. That's very true.
Sure. And even like trying clothes on. So Uniqlo, which I really like a lot, has it's not exactly like a virtual like VR solution the way that these are here. It's more like a series of really pointed questions that are extremely data driven. So like you're looking at a shirt and it's like a basic cotton white shirt and you're like, am I a small or a medium? I'm sometimes in between. So they'll ask you what you consider your size to be. And then based on how other people have said, yes, it's true to size small, or yes, it's true to size medium, it will then give you a recommendation based on that and a couple other questions.
Yeah, because the sizes don't always match anyway.
Right, exactly. Like what is women's pant sizes anyway? Like what bizarro world science do they use to like establish that? So what I really like is like just a series of really pointed questions. And I took the plunge and bought pants online. That's something I never do. And it was pretty close. So I'm just interested in seeing how these companies start to pivot and how they deal with not being able to try clothes on, not being able to test products. Like it's kind of interesting, these little solutions that are cropping up.
Yeah, I mean, the technology is it's the perfect timing. It's like before with web, you know, earlier web technologies like Web 2.0 and everything, the technology and the industry weren't aligned well. So like, you know, you either had too geeky of a universe trying to build online banks that no one used back in the early 00s, or, you know, you had like technologies that weren't good enough for what you were trying to do. But now every phone is starting to ship with enough technology to do some basic virtual reality or augmented reality to make this stuff happen with like GPU accelerators and accelerometers and, you know, other pieces of equipment on them that make this possible. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And AR and VR used to be very just like, I want to say like the gold dust, like kind of accessible to a lot of people. But like when there's a real application for it like that and a real need, like it starts to become important.
It's very cool. I'm going to have to check this out. It's very cool. Read this article in depth. Thank you for that one. All right. Next up, we have something that's like all about, to misquote somebody else, all about coulda, not shoulda. Patton Oswalt's old joke. So there's a need for some developers to run BASIC on almost anything they possibly can. The old BASIC programming language, you know, 10 print hello world, 20 go to 10. That's my generation's like hello world. You know, we would go up in the Sears and go up to the TI-99 computer and type 10 print ha 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 20 go to 10 and do an endless loop, and I would spill across the screen, and the guy would just look at us like, you idiots. But so now you can do that apparently on an Arduino. Someone came up with, this guy Trevor J, came up with a AT for Atmel chip, a TinyBasic, which is a straightforward port of Dennis Allison's famous TinyBasic, which was in a newsletter back in 1975 of all times. So they even have like a little quick note on here in the video, but you basically load this as a sketch on your Arduino. And when you do that, you set it up, it starts a headless basic interpreter. Apparently you can turn on a serial console and type in 10 print, 20 go to 10. And they did this in 348 bytes of RAM, which is pretty darn impressive. And just curious, like how crazy this looks. If we look at the basic blink, that's not it. If you look at the program, that's it. Behold, basic in Arduino. So this is literally TinyBasic in strings in Arduino. So like I said, it's not that you have to do this or you should do this, but you could. And so someone did at some point. So I love that. I love when people put together crazy things. In fact, let me see if I can find this. I just read this the other day too. Minecraft, Windows 95, Doom. This is hilarious. On the verge, I'll add this to our talk because this is in the all about could have, not should have. Now, you know, there's these whole things in Minecraft where you can actually, it's Turing complete, which means it implements a basic language that can be programmed that can follow instructions. Well, people have built small CPU simulators in it where you have a running CPU and you can push blocks through it and make it do calculations. Well, someone finally put together a Windows 95 PC. So they actually put together an emulation of Windows 95 that was complete enough that they could then load Doom in the Windows 95 in Minecraft, so you can play a video game from, you know, 1998 or whatever in Minecraft. It's ridiculous. I'm impressed with that one.
I love that. That's like the guy who did the Microsoft operating system on an Apple Watch.
Yes,
It took like
yes.
3 minutes to get past the home screen.
If you are that bored with your projects, I'd love to talk to you. It's very cool. You know, it's like when people jailbreak the iPhone, if they put like Windows on a tablet or whatever. It's always fun to watch people really flex their coding muscles in different ways. But that one particularly is hilarious to me. So there's that. All right. Here's one that's more red meat and useful for a developer. Let's say that you're a developer and you're becoming the data guy or gal or person. I shouldn't say gal, it's terrible. The data person on a project. And you're the data person, you end up doing a lot of the DBA work, right? And so you're not sure about how to do certain things. Well, this is a nice article to come to your rescue about some techniques to use. Hakibenita has a website, some SQL tricks for an application DBA, non-trivial tips for database development. And I thought this was a really nice article. This person is explaining they never had a desire to fiddle with backups or tune storage. Until this day, I like to say I'm a DBA that knows how to develop applications and not a developer that knows his way around the database. So they're more of a DBA supporting developers day to day. And some people end up in that role, right? You're more suited to and like working with data than you do like working with code. Well, you know, here are a bunch of nice little techniques. You know, real non-obvious stuff, for example, like always loading sorted data, right? So if you have data that you want to search for in range order, and you have the ability to sort it in that range order, and then index it in that range order, maybe even physically index it where the indexes are part of the data. Sorting it first when you upload it makes it all physically contiguous in space. So when you're reading things, it's quicker. Real basic thing to do in a very large data set, that can really matter. If you're fetching a bunch of things, let's say by date range, and the data is stored by date range, when you search, you can start at a particular location, read directly through the data until you exit that search criteria. So if I say I want to see 1 day of data in this giant data set, it knows where to start, it knows where to get out, and it's very quick. It's a real basic thing to do, but it's one of those things that unless you've had to do it before, it's not obvious. Let's see here. This is a big one. Disable constraints and indexes during bulk loads. So if you're importing lots of data into a database and you have to do some working of it to like index it later, you have to drop and recreate the indexes and drop and recreate the constraints. So that if you're loading things in different orders than you would expect to, you're not going to get constraint violations, right? If you load the sale before you load the customer or the product, for example, and you're going to do all of them at one big set of bulk loads, well, you can drop the constraints, put the system offline, drop constraints, upload everything, re-enable the constraints, re-index, and move on. So that's another thing that you can do. These are just really good tips overall. One of the things that I found really useful was being able to make SQL out of SQL. And so you make your queries out of the query language. So for example, and I'm just going to show a real simple, cheesy little sample here. Let's say you wanted to create, a drop script to drop a bunch of tables that started with like, temp or whatever. So you could say select, and I'm just making up a fake SQL here, drop table, and this would be table name or something like that from data dictionary. I'm making up things here where table name like, temp something. And then what happens is you get a bunch of things out of that query. And you probably want to have your database's termination character for the statement. So you could have temp a drop table temp. This would generate this for you automatically. Apparently there is a word called trable. There you go. So the point being that you can build SQL. You can build SQL statements from queries from your system tables that you have in your database. That one has really saved my bacon a lot when I've needed to do like bulk operations or maybe build a script to create all the indexes on a particular set of tables based on their keys. If you can come up with a good query based on the database's metadata, you can generate the queries that you're going to have to run to make things happen. So that's just another one kind of riffing off of that. All right, and so that's our news segment. One thing I wanted to bring up is, in terms of like local recent posts, Tracey also has another thing, a 15 minutes with that we had here. Let me see here. That was not it. Let me try again. Oh, it's because
you got it.
The link. Oh, is the link in? Yeah, it's right there. Thank you. I put the whole text in. There we go. So she does another 15 minutes with Aws Robinson, I think that's right, on mobile strategies at Comcast. I don't want to put you on the spot, Becca. Have you looked at this?
Oh, yeah. So she talks to Ed Weege, and it's a more high-level business discussion of, like, everyone's on their phones now. Like, if you're not at least making your website somewhat responsive for mobile, you don't have to develop an app completely, but it's important to reach those users. So they really take a step back and talk about the considerations that you should make for your business, piecing together a strategy, what that looks like. And Ed Weege heads up the mobile engineering services department at Comcast, so she's like extremely well qualified to talk through this stuff, especially on like a giant scale. So just a great conversation between Tracey and Ed Weege.
Excellent. So yeah, I encourage you to watch that. Speaking of things that are happening, tomorrow night we have my talk over at the Philadelphia Area Cloud and DevOps Users Group. And if I can remember what that URL is, give me 1 second here. Mm-hmm. I think I can find that. Philly Cloud and DevOps User Group. Suburban Philly Cloud and DevOps, here it is. I've got it for you. I did a talk at ETE this year, Philly Emerging Technologies for the Enterprise, called Serverless Schmerverless. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I don't think that serverless is the worst thing ever written. I also do think that if I'm doing an application and I'm working with developers that have to onboard very quickly, I feel that container-based development in the cloud right now has an advantage. And so this talk is to kind of poke a little bit of fun and poke a little bit of questioning and critique around what serverless means for a development team in terms of their velocity and things like estimating costs and just complexity. And so I'm giving that talk tomorrow night at 5:30 p.m. It's on a meetup for the Suburban Philly Cloud and DevOps public group. You're welcome to join, and I'm sure the video will be available afterwards. But hopefully that's been informative for everybody. And so with that topic, I wanted to do a little bit of riffing around this. And I've been thinking about, there is the talk as it sits and what I'm going to shape it into when I talk tomorrow night. But in general, I'm thinking that one of the things that we had about a decade ago I think I lost Becca, but I'm going to keep going. She'll come back. There she is. That's all right. One of the things that, we had a decade, 2 decades ago in software that we have a little less of today is a little more strong standards organizations for multi-platform products. And what I mean is, for example, JavaScript, for example, is a language. There's the ECMAScript TC39 committee, right, that shepherds all the JavaScript language features. And I think if that wasn't established back in the early 2000s or late 90s, I don't know that JavaScript would have really gained a firm common foothold across all the browsers. Say what you want about it, but most browsers have a pretty good standardized JavaScript, and anything that's not standard, it's not standard. And to the fact that you can lint for it and check for syntax and say, yeah, this is something that, maybe we don't recommend you do this because it's not cross-browser or something like that. Another thing, I'm looking at things like serverless, and serverless meaning a whole bunch of things, like the serverless functions. They're called lambdas in AWS. And so serverless functions themselves, there's no real standard. And I think if you compare that to, and I'm going way back here to the servlet standard, way back when in Java, now I'm talking like an old timer, but the servlet standard was created back, I think, 98 or 99 as part of the original Java Enterprise Edition. In fact, there was the Teapot book, which I don't think I have here, but it's the famous servlet standards book. And yes, this was before the internet was the big internet and everyone was moving in rapid pace. But what it did was it kind of put some goalposts out there, and it said, here's a basic standard for sending requests in and getting answers back. And if you're going to be a servlet container running servlet functions and servlet classes, here's what you have to implement. And it was, of course, run by Sun, when they were doing Java. But I think sometimes innovation, if it's girded by coming up with some specification and standards, leads to a little more sane growth and a more widely available growth. So once the servlet spec came out, there were a bunch of vendors that said we could do that. And IBM and EA WebLogic, which was Tenga at the time, but all these different companies were doing their servlet containers. And you had little tiny one-offs that were doing it. And eventually it kind of shook down into a couple of industry bigwigs and some open source vendors that followed the spec. I think with things like serverless, because there is no standard, everything's moving so quick that the features are outstripping the available tooling and the developer productivity part. And so that's one of the things I think it would be great if, for example, like even if the serverless framework, for example, were to head up a body that would try to make a standard for what serverless is, how serverless things deploy. And I know I'm speaking like it's all moonbeams and sunshine out there because all the cloud vendors are different. But it would be good to see some sort of like standard evolve around things like serverless. Whereas if you look at Docker, for example, Docker is a de facto standard. There's a container format, there's the way the containers are created. Everyone's using the same build tools. And even if you look at Kubernetes, you're still doing Docker containers in Kubernetes. And you're doing it cross-platform, cross-operating system, cross-cloud. And so I think that's what I'm wrestling with, and some of the things I'll talk about in that serverless meetup, in that meetup coming up where I talk about serverless, is it would be good to see more tooling around serverless and more standardization around serverless, so that it wouldn't be such a moving target all the time. There could be some things to kind of stake your claim on and say, well, if I learn these features, then I can work on a couple of different cloud servers, for example, and at least get basic things done. And so that's my semi-rant around that. Okay, and everyone's tuning out, I'm sure, by now. Hey, Becca, let's
What's up?
Podcast for a couple minutes. I want to open a segment called Whatcha Listening to. And so let's talk about some podcasts. I have 2, but let's start with yours. You have one podcast that you were going to bring up. What is it?
Yeah, so it's called Reply All. And I was never really a podcast person until I listened to one episode of this podcast. So yeah, the whole like ecosystem is, this American Life, Ira Glass. He had a mentee, Alex Bloomberg, I believe his name is, who founded up Gimlet Media. So Gimlet Media is like this podcast universe, and they have a bunch of like smaller podcasts within it. Reply All is one of those podcasts, and it's like tech, human interest-y, but mostly tech. And what I love about it is the two DJs for it, PJ Vogt, Alex Goldman, perfect pair together. And they have a bunch of, like I said, some of the stories are a little bit more human interest, but Alex Goldman, one of the hosts, worked tech support for like a pretty big chunk of his life. So he has this show called Super Tech Support, and people call in with these like really niche and like bizarre problems that are like usually tech adjacent. And the one episode that really got me in, it was I actually have to look it up. It was number 141, and it's Adam Pisces and the $2 Coke. So it was a Domino's employee in the Midwest somewhere started getting like a flood of these really weird orders from a guy named Adam Pisces. They were all online orders, and they were all just for a $2 Coke. So, but the weird part is he would never come in to pick them up. So at the end of the day, they would have 3 orders from this Adam Pisces guy and 3 Cokes sitting out waiting for him. And he was just like, I don't know, like maybe it's just a practical joke, but apparently Domino's has this employee kind of intranet where they can all go on and talk across the country to other Domino's employees. So he was like, I'm just going to say something and see if this is a problem for anyone else. And it turns out that Domino's all across the country were getting this order for this $2 Coke from Adam Pisces. And so this Domino's employee gave a call to PJ Vogt, Alex Goldman at Reply All, and was just like, help me figure out like what is happening here. And hilarity ensues. It is just a fantastic episode, start to finish. Definitely recommend Reply All, highly.
I love stuff like that. My one friend, Rocco, who's he's in the tech support business. He has the daily tech support call log, and it's not public. And I wish it was. I'm telling him, write a book, because they are screaming funny. He works with a bunch of lawyers. And lawyers are like, get this done right now. I don't care what you're working on. Do this thing. And they always ask really basically dumb questions. And he's like, how do you exist? Asking questions like this. Every time you ask a question like this, they don't get, and they're funny. So I'm hoping someday either to get him on as a guest or to get him to write something, because it's just laugh out loud funny.
Even
tech support can be
or something of that. Yeah, that's the good stuff.
Oh, it's so great. I have 2. I have, and they're both by a guy named Corey Quinn. Now, Corey Quinn, let's see, last week in AWS. Corey Quinn he calls himself a cloud economist. He's also a bit of a comedian. He did at AWS reInvent. He had his walking tour of the trade show floor, and I didn't make it in time. I was late for it, but he's nothing but snarky. So he's got a bit of like what do you want to call it, cynicism and realism in his approach to things, and sometimes he goes a little too far, but he has some pretty interesting things. So there's actually 3. There's the morning brief, 3 days a week. There's the Screaming the Cloud, which is where he talks about different cloud platforms, and then there's also, what is the other one? I guess that is the other. And there's Serverless Chats, which is not his, but we'll focus on these 2. But if you're curious of getting some views into AWS from someone who's not directly tied to AWS, just to kind of get an outside perspective, they're interesting. There is also the official AWS podcast. I don't want to leave them out. So just be fair. And we are, for full disclosure, we are an AWS partner. So there is an official AWS podcast, and that one is very good. There's a lot of really good information in here. With a number of different people that they bring in for different features and such. But it's definitely from the AWS perspective, from the Amazon perspective with their engineers. So you can kind of get both sides of that, engineers and then outside views. So those are a couple of podcasts that I've been listening to lately, besides other ones. Oh, by the way, another good tech podcast while we're at it is, let's see. I know this is a little more consumer-based, but I've always loved This Week in Tech. And This Week in Tech is a great weekly podcast by Leo Laporte. He did the Screensavers 3 decades ago on a channel on cable. And I think it was about 25 years ago, he went and decided that he was going to do online podcasts. And he's someone I've modeled my interest in podcasting around. He's a really interesting guy to listen to. Runs a bunch of different podcasts, one on Mac, one on Windows. But This Week in Tech is a really great one, talks about tech news. And he has another one, which is called The Tech Guy, which is more for consumer techie questions. So anyway, those are a couple podcasts that we listen to. All right. Let's see. Is that everything? I think that might be everything. I don't think I'm missing anything.
That's all.
That's all we wrote. So for this week, this is Tech Chat Tuesdays. I'm Ken Rimple.
I'm Becca Redford.
And you have a good week.